Today is a continuation of what we started doing yesterday. Okay? Today, we did not have time first period to grade your own stuff because first period the assembly went over, and so we just didn't get to everything. So, drone, if you have submitted it, you don't have to worry about it anymore. We will get around to grading it when we have a little bit of a more easy day. If you have not submitted it, you should submit it so you don't have to worry about it, right? So if you have a hard copy right now, you can give it to me right now. And I will pause while we do. So today we are continuing with this idea of completing the square. And we are using a more special case today. But before we really start that, let's just kind of review what we started on yesterday. So if I give you the equation y equals x squared plus 4x plus 20, we want to get this general form into vertex form. So take a few moments, and I will pause while you try and get this into vertex form. So, if I asked, Will, can you tell me what the first thing you did was? Subtract 16. Okay. For people who are wondering where that 16 came from, can you explain how you got that 16? Okay, I believe you're referring to our Dutch boy half and square, yes? So we said if you use half and square, that means whatever number you have in the b of your general form, you half it, and then you square it. So since 4 is in our b, we put a 4 here and said 4 divided by 2 squared gave us 4. And we knew that this number here, we wanted it to be 4. So to get it to be 4, we wanted to subtract 16. But, Anna, if we subtract 16, what else also must we do? We must also add 16 so we don't actually change the equation. Okay? Looks like nonsense now. But if we then group just this first part and set that plus 16 aside for now, we will get our equation of x squared plus 4x plus 4, and then there'll be just a plus 16 hanging out over here. And then we can factor this. So if we wanted to factor this into its two parts, Kate, what would be our best bet for the number that goes in each of these? All right, we got a 2, and is it going to be positive or negative? So we've got x plus 2 for both of those, and we still got our plus 16 hanging out over here. And then from here, we can just write our equation as x plus 2 squared plus 16, and now we have our general form is now in vertex form. Okay. Also, I was giving thought yesterday, kind of as an aside, I was giving thought yesterday about why completing the square is so important, because that is a good question. I know that we said, if you just have the general form and you want to find the vertex form, you can just use the axis of symmetry, and the axis of symmetry, you use x equals b over 2a. My question to you is, I gave this to you, but where does it come from? So, in a few days, looking forward, we'll kind of see why we're looking at completing the square and why we're looking at it and why it's so important, because completing the square will actually get us to this equation here. So we gave you this equation before, didn't really explain where it came from. Now that we're actually completing the square, we're going to figure out where it came from, just not today. Okay? All right, my next question for you, looking at this problem here, what would have happened if I decided I wanted to put a 3 right there? Would you be able to complete the square the same way? Hint, you would not. So today what we are going to learn about is if you do have some kind of coefficient in front of your x squared term, how can you complete the square just like we were doing before? So if you are on today's notes, this is the first slide here, first example. And if we're looking at this example, you'll notice that we have this annoying 4 right here. So what we want to do is we want to figure out a way that 4 won't be there anymore so that we can just complete the square how we normally do. So the way that I'm going to propose is, remember how yesterday there were a few equations that we did where there was some x squared term and then there was some x term and then there was just a blank and we were just able to fill in the blank however we wanted to do that? Well, today we're going to make our blank. So the way that we're going to make our blank is that we're going to write out 4x squared plus 16x. But instead of writing the plus 17, I'm first going to write a plus and then a blank. And then I'm going to write my plus 17 out here. Okay? It's like the same thing that we were doing before, but now we just have this blank for now. Okay? From this blank, what we want to do then is just like how we always did, we want to group stuff. So we're just going to group this first part here with the blank included. And then if we look at just these first 2 terms, what do you notice about those terms? They're both divisible by 4. So if we take this and factor out of 4, we'll be left with an x squared plus 4x plus still a blank, because we don't know what's right there. And then out here, 17 is still hanging out. If I had just not had this blank and kept the 17 in here, would I have been able to factor out of 4? I would not have. Which is why this is kind of tricky, and I would never expect you to just like wake up one day and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, why don't we just try it this way, right? So from here, now what we want to do is, if you notice right here, we have just a typical fill in the square, complete the square, right? So if you think about just in here, just in our parentheses, what value would work best in our blank? 4. So now we've got a 4 there, but I haven't forgotten, we still need to make sure that our equation is the same, right? So shouldn't I just subtract a 4? I added a 4, so I should subtract a 4. Except this isn't just a 4 anymore. It's a 4 inside of a parentheses that is multiplied by a 4. So this 4, you need to make sure that you are multiplying by whatever you have factored out. And that is a positive 16, which means that we added 16 to the first part of our equation here, which means that we must subtract 16 from the second part of our equation. Now if we do that, we have a 4, we have our 2 factors, and then over here on the right, we have 17 minus 16, which is just positive 1. So accidentally, this looks exactly like the equation, or this looks exactly like the factor we had just done for our practice. So we know that they're both just plus 2. And so our vertex form overall will give us y equals 4, x plus 2 squared plus 1. So from this, then what do we know our vertex to be? It is indeed negative 2, 1. And then is our parabola upwards facing or downwards facing? It is upwards. So if it's upwards, that means that we have a parabola that looks like this. So our vertex will be a minimum. And now we have this idea of domain and range, right? So if I put any x value in here, Will it work? Can I put 0 in there? Can I put a positive? Can I put a negative? If the answer to all three of those is yes, then your domain is just negative, that should be a negative there. Negative infinity to positive infinity. Is that how you typically write your domains? There's infinities? Yes? Okay. And then we got to figure out the range. Our range is just from wherever that vertex is upwards, right? And range is the y value. So what is the y value of our vertex? It's just that number right there, 1. So we know that it starts at 1 and it goes to infinity. And does it include 1? It does. So that's inclusive. And then infinity would be a parenthesis because it is exclusive. I don't know if you guys have a hard time remembering inclusive and exclusive. I know I did. And the way that I remember it now is that if it's inclusive, inclusive is an I, and this part of the I looks like the bracket. That's inclusive. Or including. Okay? So, let's try another one. This one's a little bit tougher. Yes, did you have a question, Madison? No questions? Then, what we are going to do now, I want to go through this example together as a class as well, because this is really hard. This is the one that first period really struggled with. This is also the one that I struggled with, okay? The reason why it's hard is because there's this negative sign here. So let's just do it like how we did the last one, okay? So for the last one, we said, okay, we have y, negative x squared plus 20x plus some kind of blank, and then minus our 94. Right. Now, we want to factor out our negative, because I don't like having negatives. So I'm going to factor out my negative, and I'm left with x squared minus 20x minus my blank, and then there's still this minus 94 hanging out. Okay, take 20 seconds and talk with your table partner across the table from you, and figure out what goes in this blank. Okay? What would have to go in that? I'll give you a few moments. I'm giving you a few minutes. Quinn, have we come to a consensus? What value would we need in this blank?
Well, if you don't keep the minus.
That is a good question. If we don't even worry about this minus, then we just say, overall, what number needs to be here? We need a positive 100 here. But our problem is we have a negative. So what we have to put in this blank here would be a negative 100 so that this becomes positive. Okay? Yes, Brian.
When you half and square the negative 20, you get positive.
So when you half and square negative 20, you would get a positive 100, which means that everything here needs to be positive 100. Okay. This is the hardest part about completing the square, is this idea of negatives. Okay, now here comes the last of the hardest parts, I promise. If we have this value here, we need to figure out, are we going to add or subtract 100? Okay? Right here, because we have a negative and another negative, that becomes a positive 100. You have a positive 100 here, multiplied by the negative in front, which becomes a negative 100. So overall, for the first part, we subtracted 100 from this first part overall, which means from the second part here, we need to add 100. Okay? I'll give you a few seconds. Look at that. Try and wrap your minds around that. And if you are confused, now would be a perfect time to express this confusion. Okay. Would it be okay if I went through that process right there once more? Okay. Does everyone get the point where we put a negative 100 here, so overall we could get a positive 100? Okay, we've gotten that part. Now from here, we said we have a subtracting a negative, which is the same thing as a positive. So this just becomes a positive 100. Then, like we did in this problem here, we took whatever this was. We took this, and we multiplied it by whatever was out here. We're going to do the same thing here, so we're going to take our positive 100, multiply it by whatever's out here, which is just a negative sign, and that means that this first term here is a negative 100, and if this is a negative 100, in order to balance out our equation, we need to add 100 to the other side. Okay. Once we have done all of that, we will arrive back in safer territory. Did you have a question, Ryan?
I'm just still confused on, like, because if you do the half and square thing with the negative 20, then you get negative, or you get positive 100.
Yes.
But then, so then wouldn't it be minus a positive 100?
So the question is, why does, the question is right here, if we have this negative 20 and we half and square it, then you get negative 10 squared, which is positive 100.
Oh, so that's negative mean.
So this is what you need right here, overall. Because if you think about it, if we just set a general, okay, yeah, and just to clarify for other people who still aren't getting there, if we had our equation from before, that was the x squared plus 4x, and then I put a minus here, you would not be able to complete the square if this was not a negative number. Because when you complete the square, you get two values that are the same for here, right? If they're the same, and the sign here has to be the same as well, can you get a negative? You can't possibly get a negative if these two signs are the same. Which means that this has to be positive in some way, right here. So if you ever see a negative here, then you know that your value here will be negative, and then whatever number you got for the half and square. Okay. I know that that's hard. I know that it's hard. Okay. So, once we have gotten to this point, you are in safe territory. Why don't you take a few moments and just solve the rest of it out? We have our factors. I know it's kind of messy in there, so I can rewrite this for you if you'd like. So try and solve, and I will pause while I give you some time. We have gotten some time to work on this. Avery, have you been able to figure out what the final vertex form looks like? Okay, hold on. Guys, Avery's trying to talk. Thanks, everyone. Okay. X minus 10 squared plus 6. All right. Do we feel comfortable with these two examples? Would you like to try one on your own, or would you like to just go ahead to the homework? Okay. Can we do, oh, yes. Right now on the quiz, it says 1 attempt. I will change it. It will be 2 attempts like it is. Would you like to do the first one together? Okay. So, if you give me a few seconds, I will get to that quiz. And we will do the first one together. Okay, is this the first question? Okay. All right, this is our first question here. This one has a negative in it, so it is a little tricky, but that's okay. We have a negative 3x squared minus 18x, and there's a blank for whatever we need. So our first step would be, what do you think, Caitlin, would be our first step if we see this? Yeah, if you're looking at these two terms right here, is it gonna let me? Oh, that's so sad. Is there a button I must press, or does this just not?
It does, I don't think it'll work.
All right, then if I switch over really quick to the smart board, can someone remind me? It was y equals negative. Okay, so if we're looking at these first two terms, what do you notice about them, Caitlin? We can factor out our negative 3. So then you get this. Okay, excellent. So we factored out our negative 3. Then, Parker, did you have a question? Minus the blank. You are indeed correct. See, there's the tricky part. Minus the blank because we factored out a negative 3. So we factored out a negative. So this positive becomes a negative. All right, good catch, Parker. All right, then, let's see. Oliver, can you tell us what you would ideally like to put here, not worrying about the negative sign? So we want a 9 here. If we want a 9 here, Ian, what should we have in the blank? Negative 9, indeed. All right. From there, we have a, this is y equals. From here, we have y equals negative 3. This is a subtracting a negative, which makes it a positive. So now we have x squared plus 6x plus 9. We know that our two factors are going to start with an x, and they're going to end with a specific number. And Hayden, what do you think that number is? The number that will go into these two blanks. Which one number will multiply to give us 9? Positive 3s, indeed. And then this is part of up here, so I'm going to erase that a little bit. So then from there, did we have anything else that we needed to add by the entire time? We did not. So that's all we have. Except we added this stuff and we never subtracted anything. Right? So if we wanted to subtract something, Georgia, what would you suggest that we subtracted? Subtract 9? Sam, do you agree? Are we subtracting 9? Yes. All right. One more thing, though. One thing, just one thing, okay? I'm sorry. We have the 9, but what do we have to do with this if we factored something out earlier? We need to make sure that we multiply those two numbers together. Is that what you're going to say, Quinn?
No, I was thinking that it goes back.
So, if we have these two numbers here, then instead of subtracting by 9, we want to subtract by positive 9 times negative 3 is a negative 27, right? So here we have a negative 27. So what should we subtract or add by? Add 27. Okay? Great. Does this make sense, or are we still confused? Yes.
So like the question was just to fill in C for the
Yes. To fill in C. So C is 27. Okay? So for this last part, we had a positive 9. From the positive 9, we multiplied it by negative 3 and saw that this first term here would give us a negative 27. We have a negative 27, so we need to add 27 to the end to make sure our equation is equal. And so that adding 27 just kind of hangs out until the end. So if you were to write this in vertex form, you would have y equals negative 3, x plus 3 squared plus 27. Right? So this,
Negative.
right here we had a positive 9, right? If we have a positive 9 and you multiply it by a negative 3, it becomes a negative 27. So that's what you have for the first half. So to balance it out, since you have a negative 27 here, you need a positive 27 here. So this is what it looks like in vertex form. So 27 is the answer. If you, yeah. All right. You have the rest of the time. What time is this period end? 44? Awesome. You have the rest of the time to work on your homework. All right? And that will be all we are covering today.